Hello, everyone. How you doing there? This is Damon Osa and Conte Cunningham, the Vice President of HAMA, and you are joining us for our for the second edition of our HAMA Live series, where we bring people on and we talk about all issues related to HAMA. Last week we had Maxwell Kalu from African Warrior Fighting Championship. He and I had a great time. So today. I have a guest, and hopefully I'll have a special guest coming on later on. But up first, we're going to talk with Jozef Mogilevski. I hope I said that correct. Jozef wrote a phenomenal paper on African swords. I saw it about a year ago online. As I was doing some research. It's called Fire Swords and Magic, and it speaks about African weaponry, the importance of African swords, their uses, combat versus ritualistic versus ceremonial, and so forth and so on. And it takes a very complex topic. African swords are an extremely complex topic. And it breaks it down in a way that's understandable for many folks. So I want you all to welcome with me, Jozef. How you doing there, Jozef?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
All right, good. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jozef? Just real quick, let us know who you are and how you found yourself here today with me.
Well, so I'm born and raised Central Massachusetts. I've been involved in martial arts in one form or another for the last 22 years. Somewhere, and this all kind of gets into how I got into swords in general and eventually into African swords. But when I was a teenager, I trained every single day in martial arts. My parents' style was American Kempo. And one afternoon while training, I was practicing in my backyard. I wound up breaking my shoulder. I was doing a barrel roll, wow. And I wasn't paying attention. I rolled onto a rock. And the month that I spent letting my shoulder recuperate gave me a lot of time to start doing some research. And I got addicted to researching different martial arts styles, techniques, methodologies. And in the process, because being a teenager in Central Massachusetts, I grew up in a very insular community. I actually grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community in Central Mass. And the image of martial arts tends to be very limited. You just see kung fu and karate, and that's pretty much it. And in the process of researching, I started finding martial arts from around the world. And many of them were more weapons focused than the unarmed styles that I've been familiar with earlier on. And that started kind of developed a fermenting interest in bladed combat of all different forms. And then several years ago, I wound up going, in this case, was actually going back to university. I went to Clark University, my very first semester there, looking for a history requirement course, because my degree is in military history. I saw a class on sub-Saharan African art history. And seeing that class, I realized that most of my historical education up until that point had missed Africa, which I realized I didn't know what I should know. I didn't know what I could know. And so I decided, best place to start with anything is to take a step right now. So I signed up for the class, and the final for the class, rather than an exam, was.
Do you remember the professor?
Paper. Yes, Professor, I can't remember her first name, Professor Beale, the arts department at Clark University. And she is an expert in African art history. Her focus is on the southern half of Africa, specifically, I believe, if I recall correctly, it was pottery and weaving as connected with the San people, is her very specific area of expertise. But it was a general class on sub-Saharan African art history. And at the time, I had just started getting into a little bit of amateur blacksmithing. I am not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I'm going to just say that right now. Other people will make far, far nicer things than I can. but my interest in, it's very, very rudimentary. I'm mostly self-taught, so it's not going to be the prettiest work.
You have a working understanding. Yes.
I have a working understanding. I also have a benefit in that one of my earlier degrees before I went to Clark was in engineering. So I have a very intimate understanding of the chemical and mechanical workings of metals. But taking that class, it got me a chance to intersect my interest in blades, bladed combat, and smithing. And so I was the only one who picked any type of metal work as my final research project. And so that research work led to the paper, which got edited, re-edited, more research done, and eventually I wound up publishing it in Mensa Bulletin.
Okay.
So, and that started.
That's where I saw your paper. How did you get with Mensa?
So
you knew that was coming. So
I kind of had to know that was coming. So my involvement with Mensa was more or less a question of a personal challenge. Growing up, I had always heard that Mensa was this club for people that only the smartest people can get into Mensa, and it was kind of like a personal thing. I wanted to know if I, in essence, to continue with the academic terminology, if I made the grade.
Okay.
And so I wound up taking. It's actually 2 exams. It isn't 1 exam. It's 2 exams that you take back to back, and I took them and spent about 2 or 3 weeks chewing on my nails before the paper came back, and I got in.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you got in, because that's how I came across your work. So let's talk about your paper. Let's break down your paper, Fire, Swords, and Magic. How'd you come up with the name?
Well, the name came about mostly because of the 3 fundamental elements. The rule of threes, it pops up across all aspects of humanity, and this was no exception. The fire of the forge was one of the main symbols. In fact, this wasn't something that was included in the paper, but it was research work that had been ancillary to it. A smithing community in central Cameroon, the Babongo people, reference the divine origin of smiths, and the symbol of the divine origin of smiths was a demigod descending from heaven with fire in one hand and a smithing hammer in the other. So fire is the obvious element when it comes to any type of blacksmithing. You need fire to heat the metal to the appropriate temperatures to do anything with it. So the fire part was obvious. Swords, you have both the metal, because you're dealing with metals, but you also have the specific incarnation of the metal, the sword in that particular instance. The last element, the magical side of it, is that where blacksmithing throughout Eurasia is very, very perfunctory. And in the paper, I actually reference this in terms of the symbolism between the gods of smithing in Africa and the gods of smithing in Europe, where the African gods of smithing, such as Ogun and Gu, are creator deities. They are the center of the pantheon. They are the originators of society and culture and civilization. By comparison, Hephaestus, the Greek god of blacksmithing, and Vulcan, the Roman god of blacksmithing, are secondary figures. They simply make the tools that the other gods use to do stuff, but they themselves are mostly in the background. They tend to be more isolated. They're not as dynamic. They're more.
It was Ogun and his sword who cleared the land. For the rest of the gods to come. He paved the way for the rest of the Orisha to come down. So yes, very, very important. Correct.
So that was one aspect to it. The other aspects with the Manda Smiths and their association with the inherent energy of life, Nyama, this essence that when I've explained Nyama to people before, I usually use the analogy that it's very much like the concept of chi that you find in China, that there's an inherent energy that permeates all of life and all of existence, and that smiths have a special ability within Manda society to control and direct Nyama, which allows them to work with metals in a way that other people simply can't. So it's not an easy thing to sum up the ideas of Nyama, of smithing gods, and of course this is just that's like the little flag on the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the symbolic and the metaphysical aspects of smithing.
Mhm.
So I used magic not so much to try and present like a rabbit out of the hat type thing, but to try and have a single term that encapsulates to the very best of my ability the essence of the intangible side of smithing.
Gotcha.
That it had all of these different elements that you can't really sum up in any one word, but magic was the closest I could find that really worked.
Okay.
That, and it had a good rhythm to the
Right.
sound. Fire, swords, and magic.
Yes, it does. It does. Well, it was a very, very successful paper.
Thank you.
I liked it because you talked about the way you broke it down was it was functional, functional swords, ritual swords, and then ceremonial swords. And that's as I go to explain certain shapes and features of swords to people who have no idea. It's that's kind of the progression that I take. It's I'm sure it started off as a functional sword, something that was either used for war or for agriculture. It was a blade, something that was definitely functional. And then through time, it grew and evolved into something else. So basically, someone was looking at it, one of the Fina swords, and it was very the spine was very circular and almost like a chain, and there's no way in the world you could use it as a weapon, And so and I'm trying to explain to somebody like, well, why would they want a sword that looks like this? Like, I don't want a sword that isn't usable. So I the way that I explained to I finally got through to them, it was to say, all right, imagine that you're such a bad dude that you don't even need a functional sword. Like I'm going to hold this thing, and I'm still a threat to you with this. That shows how powerful that I am, and and that finally got through to them, and they were like, okay, all right, I kind of see it, and I showed them the original, Fina, the war sword, and I showed them, the progression, and it definitely got through to them. So so do you have any favorite blades?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Two of my favorite swords, two of my favorite African swords are the Ilwoon and the Shotel. And the Ilwoon is one of those absolutely beautiful close combat weapons. And it illustrates several really crucial concepts when it comes to swords in particular. First of all, you have that in the cross section of the blade itself, you have that lovely fuller that gives it incredible strength while lightening the sword. Yeah, you can see the fuller on this blade gives it just enough lightness so that it's very fluid in motion. But it also has this really unique property that it doesn't actually have a point on the end. The end has this almost axe-like curvature to it that ends in 2 points. And this actually leads to an area that I was starting to do some research in before coronavirus hit, and I ceased to have access to the libraries that I was looking into for information. But the research work I was starting to get into was looking for archaeological evidence of post-battle burials.
Okay.
Post-battle burials are a great way to determine exactly how weapons were used in actual combat. The remains of warriors killed by a blade tell you a lot about how the blade was actually used, and in particular, if it's facing any type of armor, how do you get around the armor? The most famous example is the mass burial from the Battle of Visby in southern Sweden, where bodies were pulled out with spears and swords, still literally stuck in the bodies through the armor. Yes. And archaeologists and military historians got so much information from that. Yeah. So wanting to learn how these weapons were actually used in combat, I started to okay, let's see if there are any specific burials that are associated with battles in Africa that can be used to try and derive some information about how these blades were used on the battlefield. And then COVID hit. So, but once the libraries start opening back up and I get access to the text that I was starting to look at again, I'm be able to get more information on that. But it has to do specifically with the Ilwoon, with a theory I have that the shape of the blade, the more curved sides, allow for a hooking motion, and that a lot of the death blows were actually dealt with the points on the end. Those piercing spines at the very end, particularly with some examples of the Ilwoon that have very elongated spikes.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not going to take
a relatively flat one.
Yes.
They're definitely, the examples that have a nice tip spike to them.
Oh yes, and it wouldn't take a lot of force with one of those to pierce through a helmet and a skull and
Yeah.
end your opponent. But
Yeah.
obviously, the remains from a battlefield would be able to tell us that, and it would also tell us a lot about internal dynamics. Was it a civil war? Was it a battle between different people groups? How did those weapons interact with one another? You can
Mm,
tell a lot about that from the remains that are found in battlefield burials.
okay.
Um, and incidentally, going to the Ilwun as well, just as another aside, um, because it's such a beautiful weapon, and then why not keep talking about it? And this is something I had actually spoken about with you earlier, was the interaction between the grip and the blade telling you a lot about how the weapon is used. Like if you look at the grip on this Ilwun, and you see this on other Ilwuns as well, the pommel on the end is large, significantly larger than the upper part of the grip.
Yes.
So we know that this weapon was obviously not really used in thrusting, or if it was used in very minimal jabs, because the bottom pommel, which keeps the weapon from sliding out of your hand as you make wide slashing cuts, is so prominent, but the top part of the grip is really only perfunctory. It's not really enough to keep your hand from sliding up to the blade. If you're delivering a thrust, you want something that will stop your hand from sliding.
Yes.
There really isn't present there, and that tells you a lot about how the weapon was used.
Okay.
So that would actually go into the hooking and catching and then using the spike to end your opponent methodology, which, considering that most battlefields are going to be dominated by longer ranged weapons, as a general rule of thumb, weapons like halberds and spears tend to give you that range advantage over a shorter, closer weapon like the Ilwun.
Yes.
A hooking motion to clear past the spike on the end of a halberd, or to clear past the point on a spear to close into your opponent, helps tremendously. And given that the Ilwun itself was generally paired with a large rectangular shield, and throwing javelins would suggest that, much like the pairing of the Roman gladius and scutum, that the Ilwun and its shield was used for close combat, where you slam in as close as possible and deliver very close range death blows.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it would definitely, through chopping, with that big shield, you get behind there and just kind of just swing, chop. You can chop high, chop, bring it down, chop low. Definitely.
Okay. And that's another area where finding some battlefield remains what I think be very helpful, in particular because in other areas of the world where there's a pairing of a short-bladed weapon with a large shield, it's a very, very common injury to find cuts to the back of the femur, the thigh bone, of people who have been on the receiving end of attacks from people with those weapon pairings, which indicates that a low hamstringing blow is a very common initial strike to immobilize your opponent so that they can't use their mobility, perhaps mobility paired with a longer ranged weapon, to get away from the person using the shorter weapon, heavier shield combination. So that would also be very indicative.
In the SEA, Society of Creative Anachronism, we call that leg 'em and leave 'em, where it's a wrap shot. So in the SEA, you basically, if you get hit in the hand, you put your hand behind your back. You hit in the leg, you take a knee. So you'll butt up against your opponent, and you'll throw a shot that kind of comes around the back of your opponent, and hit them in the butt, hit them in the back of the thigh, hit them in the leg, and then they go down. Then you can disengage from them and go do something else because this guy's not going to chase you anymore. So that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense.
Out of curiosity, those SCA strikes that you're using, they're between about a 30 and 45 degree angle.
I would kind of say, I guess it's a 45. Like really, you're throwing. You're throwing. I guess what your target, depends on what your target is and how tall you are. But it's definitely a downward. If you're trying to hit that leg, there's a few people that have got some killer butt wraps. Because a lot of guys in the SA won't wear butt armor. Like they'll have something for their legs, and so there's a problem. Sometimes you throw a few shots to the legs, they won't feel it. So you aim for something that's a little softer, a little softer target. And then you bring it around and catch that butt, and they'll take that. They'll, good. Then they'll go down. Sorry, not myself.
No worries.
Threw a rap shot on my computer there. So So the second weapon that you mentioned was the chattel.
The
So
chattel, yes.
this is definitely one of my favorite weapons. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about the chattel?
So part of the reason why the chattel is one of my favorite weapons is, first of all, I have a very deep love in my heart for anything and everything cavalry. And this is very much a cavalry weapon. Curved swords are ideal for use on horseback because particularly straight and double-edged swords, either the slashing blow or the thrusting blow, which you generally want to avoid thrusting blows on horseback. The problem with those from horseback is with a straight blade, the impact force is likely to wrench the sword out of your hand. You have to consider most cavalry, their primary weapon was a lance or a spear of some kind. And then once the lance was broken, then they would draw a sword and use that in closer combat. The most well-known examples, of course, the medieval knight, charge, break lance. But what people forget is the lance was a dynamic mobile weapon. You charged with that. Yeah. Once your charge was broken and once you stopped moving, then you drew the sword. So the straight double-edged sword on horseback was never actually used when you were in motion. It was used specifically after your in-motion weapon was disposed of and you were now static and had to fend off these people who were mostly all about hit to floating rib height on you. Unlike that, curved swords from horseback in particular indicate a far more dynamic and fluid approach to combat. You continue to move on horseback even after your lance is broken, and thus you need a weapon that's not going to lodge in a target and then get wrenched out of your hand. A straight-edged sword has a very powerful chop, but that powerful chop also means that the blade is embedded in its target now, and if your horse is going 30 miles an hour one way and your target is stationary, that sword is going to get pulled out of your hand, or your arm is going to get pulled out of its socket. Right. So cavalry types that maintained motion after the initial impact evolved these beautiful curved swords. And in the paper, I actually referenced the compare contrast. The chattel is a unique weapon in that it evolved independently of the origin, the seed origin. There's a bit of debate about what that origin exactly is for curved swords, cavalry swords of that nature for the rest of the world. Okay. It did not evolve out of the scimitar, which itself evolved. No. Yeah.
Well, earlier chatels, I mean, you can actually see the curve growing, in with chatels, and it also has to do with also the shield. So the chattel is one of my favorite weapons because it's such a unique weapon set. The chattel shield, and of course I don't have any shields. I should have got the shield on there. But it's such a unique weapon set with the high dome of the shield, and it's why is the shield such a point? Well, if you look at the chattel, it has such a curve on it that it could reach over. It started to reach around the shield, so they had to dome it out in order to protect that curve as well. I like the chattel. It's one of my favorite weapons because it's so versatile. Because of that hook, it can be used forward or backwards. There are icons of them being used with the hook part forward and also the other way. So you can slash with it on a horseback. You can get off, turn it around, and poke a guy around the shield, if need be. It's very, very versatile, beautiful weapon. Yeah,
absolutely. That curvature, and particularly the later chattel that have the extreme curvatures, you can strike someone behind them while you're standing in front of them with this weapon. Yeah. And the advantage in that is you have a spike effectively as the point on this, which optimizes your power on impact. Smaller surface area, more powerful hit, which gives you a greater opportunity to penetrate armor. And when you're looking at body armor, the body armor on the front is always denser, heavier, stronger than the body armor on the back. You're facing your opponent, that's where the hits are going to most likely strike. So having a blade that can literally hit your opponent with an optimized strike in the weaker area of the armor, that's very advantageous.
Yes, it is. That's also a lot of times, I've heard about the throwing weapons being able to, once they hit the top of the shield, the different hooks and stuff rolling around the shield and doing damage to the warrior. If I hold it here, it might be able to go, but it'll hit hook and then come down and do damage to me coming down. So yeah, it's definitely an advantage of getting around the back of that shield.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that you bring up the throwing knives. Some of the research work that I've done with regard to throwing knives. I know this is ancillary to swords, which is of course the central topic, but throwing knives, it seems that the optimal method for throwing them is actually sideways.
Yep.
That side throw gives it a greater ability to actually effectively, and of course I'm going to blank on the term now, aerofoil. It effectively flies. The curvature of the blade gives it a bit of lift, so it travels farther.
If you look at those, they're flat on one side, and they have a foil, a dome on the other side. I actually again go back to the SCA. So I made a few throwing weapons in the SCA, and it just so what I made was I actually made one of the bird knives. And I just learned that those actually weren't thrown. But anyway, I made a throwing knife, bird knife. And when I learned that when I threw it, I didn't know how to throw it. And so most of the guys in the SCA, when they make missile weapons, they'll make smaller axes. And of course, they throw the axes this way. So I started throwing this way, and every one of my throws would go straight down. I had to loft it, and then they would see it coming. And then one day, we were having what was called the Lost Boys battle. I think it was the Lost Boys battle. Kamikaze, Lost Boys Kamikaze battle. It was just like 90 minutes of just straight fighting. And I just whipped it this way. And I watched that thing go across the field. I mean, it went 25, 30 yards, and smacked a fighter in the back, like, what was that? Like all the way across the field. And so, it just that, and then if you have a large shield, you start throwing around your shield. So that sideways motion definitely is I'm pretty sure how those were used.
Absolutely. In experiments, because there was actually a series of tests done with recreations, extremely accurate recreations. And this was actually in one of the source documents that I found during my research. It wasn't something I was able to include in the paper because the paper was focused on swords, but it was a very interesting piece of analysis. They found that the F types, so the more northern types of blades that had this, trying to do this so that, there you go, more of an F shape, those had a much shorter range, but they had more of a blunt force trauma impact type on contact, as opposed to the more winged type of blades that went much farther. Both types had a very decent maximum range with a somewhat shorter effective range. So the ability to control targeting was about 30 yards for the wing type and about 20 yards for the F type. Maximum range on the F type was about 35 yards, maximum range on the winged type without target control with the side throw was, if I recall correctly, about 50 yards maximum throw, which is very impressive.
Yeah, that's a whip right there, man.
Oh, yes. And the vertical throws were always shorter than the horizontal throws with the winged type in particular. But what I found fascinating about this is it, again, much like with looking at skeletal remains for information about how weapons were used, the fact that it was optimized for a sideways throw tells you something. That where in many parts of the world you have shield walls that overlap shields to lock in to create effectively a wall, a horizontal throw wouldn't work against a shield wall. You'd need a vertical throw. So this tells you that there was a difference in the tactical structuring of the army. It's an open field. It wasn't a block.
Yep.
And this also brought up an interesting comparison with the other missile weapons that were available. Specifically, that arrows and javelins using much smaller amounts of iron and steel, much easier to manufacture in very large numbers. And in fact, in some of the southern African kingdoms, the throwing knives were actually the possession of the king, and they were lent out to top warriors before they went out to battle, and you had to bring them back. So if a warrior threw the knife and it didn't take out an opponent, he would still have to go across the battlefield and pick it up and retrieve it. Whereas arrows and javelins, you can launch those all day long. You don't have to worry about returning the knives to the king at the end of the day.
Okay.
So it would seem to me that the evolution of the throwing knives was more for one-on-one and more dispersed combat, where you would use your archers, you would use your javelins against massed blocks of troops, which, if you look at some of the compositions of some of the armies, particularly from West Africa, I mean, the first army that comes to my mind is the Songhai Imperial Army in around 1350. It's the second largest army on the planet. The only army that was larger was China, and that's China. The Songhai Army in 1350 was 140,000 men strong. They had more than 30,000 archers. At the same time, that the total, and that's the standing army. That's not with recruits and corvée labor and civilian levies. I mean, the standing army, the largest standing army in Europe by comparison at the exact same time was France, and they only had 30,000. So the entirety of the French standing army in 1350 was equivalent to just the archers corps of the Songhai Imperial Army at the same time. So if you have 30,000 archers at your disposal, you're not going to have your throwing knife wielding warriors be your primary missile troops against the big blocks of your opposing forces. So it tells you a lot about the tactics and strategies, how these various armies function, which combine that with, anthropological evidence from skeletal remains, combine that with the analysis of the weapons themselves, can tell you a lot about how armies fought, how battles were conducted. And as a military historian, that's what I'm interested in.
Well, how'd you get into military history?
As far back as I can remember, I've always been fascinated by it, which, coming from an Orthodox Jewish community, was very much to the dismay of many, many rabbis in my community. I remember at one point when I was about 12 years old, I was talking about how much I dreamed of going to West Point, which brought the loudest groan I have ever heard from a grown man directed towards a child in my life. It's like, oh, why do you want to go into the army? No, it's not something for you to do. It's like, this is what I'm interested in. So,
well, Joseph, so my special guest is ready. So my special surprise guest coming up. Some of you may recognize him from Forged in Fire. Clarence Jackson is a two-time Forged in Fire competitor. He made it all the way to the finals. He was a runner-up. He is also a traditional blacksmith. This is a picture of him here doing some modern blacksmithing. But Clarence is he has been trained in traditional blacksmith, and I believe it was Mali. So I want everyone to welcome Clarence. How you doing there, Clarence?
What's happening, man? What's happening?
I'm glad you made it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, man. I'm trying to balance dadding and we have the twins on the way, and then also working.
Congratulations.
And
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well. So we've been on for about a half an hour now. We've been talking about Joseph's paper. He started off basically just telling us a little bit about himself. So, Clarence, why don't you tell us about yourself and how you got into blacksmithing and how you found yourself in Africa. That's an interesting story.
Yeah. So I got into, let me see if I can get in the middle of the camera. I got into blacksmithing in school. Somebody I was in art school, and then somebody said, there's a guy that teaches a metal class, and I was like, I gotta take, the metal shop. And somehow, I don't remember what we were doing. I think there was a guy that wanted to forge swords or something. I got kind of tracked on with him. And then I learned about guilds and organizations in my town. They had 2 smithing organizations. And I went outside of class and I found these guys, and these are like, they're out like on some kind of country road, Southern guys. There wasn't a black guy in sight. Guns were seen. They're all around a fire. I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm from the city, Oh, I don't know about this scene. And they're the warmest guys, man. And they had all these hand forged knives, man.
Wow.
And I had started blacksmithing because I wanted to make an adze, a wood carving tool. When I saw the American hand forged, Bowie knife and all these knives that these guys are making, it just completely took over.
Yeah.
And I've been on that, ever since.
Okay.
And my professor died actually the next semester. And
Wow.
that kind of locked me in because his buddies wanted to kind of try to step in and help. And so I made fast friends with people and got all kinds of connections that I got access that I might not have got. So I did bladesmithing in art school.
Wow.
And I don't know that anybody else was able to do that.
I took a jewelry class in college, and my final project was a pocket knife. And I remember my jewelry teacher in college, you should make knives. That's what you should do. And I'm like, nah, I'm going to go back home and lifeguard. I'm going back to Philly. I'm not taking this class. I'm done. And I didn't want to learn. I didn't want to learn anything. I didn't want to take another class at all. And it's just, I wish that I had jumped on that opportunity. So I'm glad that you took those.
Yeah. And I think they were telling people no, after us. I think it was, I got through, another guy that I was working with fell off. But because of that, I was able to use the shop. And we made forges. We did everything wrong and beginner, not wrong, but just really beginner. Made a whole bunch of ugly butter knives. But I loved it, and I saw what people were doing. And then I wanted to see what the there's not a lot of African American smiths that I found. So I wanted to see what blacksmithing was in the Black world. And so I looked around, and I have some connections, and Mali seemed to be the place to be because the place of smith in that world is valuable and kind of sacred. And so I targeted Mali. We put together a whole thing. The school kind of helped facilitate that. I did a whole bunch of independent studies, and through the independent studies, I went over there.
Okay. Wow. So tell us about your time in Mali. What did you learn? What did you learn in Mali?
Well, I mean, so much. I wish I had not been late, but I don't know what I thought I was gonna learn, and I didn't have a whole bunch of expectations because you're trying to go to a whole different country. I'm pretty young. I don't speak the language. I kind of had to learn to speak the language. And then their English. I mean, French is their second language, not English. So they're not necessarily English speakers where I was, And so, it took a while, but by the time I finally pulled up into these villages, you're talking about earthen homes, what I'm saying, thatch roofs, really, really warm African people, and it's smithing, but it's magic. Everything is magical. There are spirits of the forest. I mean, this is Islamic West Africa, right? So whatever you're thinking, this is a certain type of a thing, but it's they're Muslim. These people actually that I was with said that they are not. They're animists, which I never even thought that you would have in a region that's been Muslim for all this time. But there's all this spirituality that's tied in. So a smith is not just a metal worker. The women, the word we use for smith in Mali is numu. So numu K is a male blacksmith. Numu Muso is a female in the same family, but the ladies do clay. So well, the way we think about smithing, you got iron workers on the male side, clay ceramicists on the lady side, and then it's also, you're gonna know medicines, you're gonna know plants that make you stronger for your work, that give you certain abilities. You might be a diviner. You know what I mean? You have all these spiritual components that go with smithing. So it's all this other stuff that really blew my mind. And you know, as an artist, you're looking at the material culture of everything. So it's like, okay, you know, we hear you'll make a knife, but you may make a sheath to go with it. You're definitely going to do that. There, I'm looking at the leather work and how they do this and how they do that, and I'm just tied into all of it. You feel me?
Yeah. Yes.
So I just keyed into all that stuff, and it was rich as stuff everywhere, and it's all different from here. So
yes, that's great. That's great. Well, before you came on, Joseph and I asked him about the title of his paper, which is Fire, Swords, and Magic. And you know, and it's funny that you said the word your magic. I said, how did you come in there? And he said, you know, that was just the best word that he could figure, you know, that encompasses what's going on. I'm glad you mentioned the female smith about that, because as you and I, we talked, both of us, we all talked yesterday, and one of the conversations that we had was about the relationship between the potters' wives and the blacksmiths and iron. And so there, you know, recent theories are coming out that the Iron Age developed independently in Africa from the rest of the world. And my theory is that ironwork somehow was a byproduct of the pottery creation. Earthenware fires at, I believe, between like 1800 and like 2000, you know, degrees, 2100 degrees. And iron ore melts, I believe it's like 22, 23, you know. So it could have easily been, you know, somebody got the kiln a little hot and you know, it messed up the pottery. And then at the bottom, you know, they find this piece, you know, as they're cleaning out the kiln, somebody cuts their finger on this sharp piece of, well, what is this? And they pick it up, and you know, and of course, you know, and it's from there. So that's my theory. You know, because it's basically the two are the same. One takes fire and earth and makes a pot. One takes fire and earth and makes a sword. So that's, you know, after COVID is over, that's going to be my area of next area of research, the relationship between pottery and yeah. So that leads to the iron smelting that leads to the iron smelting process. So what I'm going to show this quick map. So this is a map of all the, you know, archaeological finds that show iron production across Africa. There's, I mean, so many of them, and they're still producing iron in Africa. Again, my connection between the two is because a lot of times the furnaces are seen as female. They will be made in a very phallic way. Some of them in this picture have breasts. I've definitely seen them with breasts, and I've seen some with what appear to be pregnant bellies. So it would be like the belly is where the fire was, and the actual billows were shaped as a penis and testicles. So, you know, the man is blowing the fire, the life into the forge and creating new life. So so that's a magical aspect. Joseph, I believe you talked a little bit about that relationship in your paper.
Yes, I did. It's something that the association between fertility, the cycle of birth, and smithing has been particularly noted in Africa. Pretty much everything you just said, the structure of the bloomeries for smelting, taking on the imagery of the female, and the bellows taking on the imagery of the male, and the bloom itself, like the actual iron bloom itself, being symbolized as a fetus when it comes out, and the slag being representative of the placenta. You know, it's kind of a miniature cosmology that I just found very fascinating. And I mean, I have a couple of personal theories as to exactly how that came about, but I don't know if you would be interested in hearing them.
Yeah, come on, that's what we hear.
So this is, again, this is one of those areas where I was starting to do some research on and haven't really had a chance because of libraries shutting down in the last couple of months to finalize things. But one hypothesis I've had is that the lack of a Bronze Age in Africa is why the structure has what it has in terms of the symbolism of the production of iron. And the reason is, if you look at Neolithic human culture, it's very much a focus on fertility centric. And it doesn't matter where you go in the world, when you look at the end of the Stone Age period, Stone Age humans everywhere were focused on anything and everything that had to do with fertility. The symbolic, the very curvaceous mother goddess symbol is found throughout the world. Symbolic representations of birth and female genitalia as a symbol of life are found everywhere where you had Neolithic cultures. The Bronze Age seems to have squashed this completely in those societies and cultures that went through a Copper and Bronze Age. But Africa went straight from stone to iron, and most of Africa had iron long before most of Eurasia had iron. So it seems that immediate transition from stone to iron without the interceding Bronze period has some type of an effect on this. And my personal hypothesis is that for whatever reason, the Bronze Age acted as a filter that removed the fertility symbolism from culture. And by going straight from Neolithic to Iron Age, that fertility importance remained present. And it came about via iron, which was used in all aspects of daily life. You know, as associates with the cosmology that the blacksmiths create civilization where women produce life. And that balances, it's actually symbolically represented in one of the theologies with Ogun and, I hope I don't butcher the name, Lawano, I think. I'd have to double check my paper. I'm blanking on her name, unfortunately, but the mother goddess who pairs with Ogun, and the two of them together produce humanity. She produces life, he produces civilization. And it's that kind of pairing that seems to have survived the transition from stone to iron, but didn't survive the transition from stone to copper and bronze.
Yeah.
Deep.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, Africa is so strange. Like, it's such a you can be with a guy who's as modern as anybody that you'd meet in the States, sitting there with his cell phone talking modern politics, and then he'll step over and beat a piece of iron on a rock, on a giant rock, possibly with not even with a hammer, like with a club-like shaped hammer that's been, you know, fabricated to the point where you're looking and you're like, this has to be like what the early Iron Age looked like, where people are actually forging with rocks on rocks, right? So the you know, I could see what you're saying, because Africa has kept a lot of the really old stuff. So maybe I haven't paid him enough attention to be able to say the Bronze Age was this long. But if the Bronze Age was a period where people are kind of moving away from hunter-gathering, maybe, and kind of settling in a certain way, and they're getting kind of settled around the kind of patriarchal societies and the way that people settle, I could see the, you know, that, you know, being a stretch of time where people have kind of transitioned, whereas Africa's, you know, that not being there, that, you know, stretch of time not being there. And then also just I feel like I'm not exactly sure why, but Africa seems to want to hold on to really old things. And I don't think everybody in the world has that same sense or even capacity. I feel like with Europe, after Rome kind of does its thing, I feel like Europe's on a track forward on that kind of, that's their evolution. Whereas the African revolution is more like, the African evolution is more, spiral. It's spiraling. You know what I'm saying? Or even circling to where, there it's like, yes, we've got iron. Yes, we can do X, Y, and Z, but the way that we're gonna deal with iron is we're gonna have this whole, like you said, with smelting, where we're not going to say, let's modernize. Let's take this new smelting technology and see how we can change the world. They're going to say, we're going to use this technology inside of the world that we already exist in, and it's going to be part of this world as opposed to like reshaping it.
Changing the world. Yeah.
And I'd say it's in part because our gods were, the earth is sacred, the earth is the mother. So I like to, imagine if, for Christianity, the heavens are where the divine lives. So imagine if when you died, you were buried in the heavens, literally, right? Well, in Africa, the earth is divine all over the place. It's the mother. And people are literally buried in the heavens where the ancestors live with God in the earth. And then the earth, you know what I'm saying? So now you're digging down in the earth to get this metal. It's all inside of a sacred context. So it doesn't roll over the context that exists. And there's a new age. It exists inside of this pre-existing context. So that makes a lot of sense.
I like that. Clarence, I asked Joseph his favorite weapons or swords. Do you have any favorite African weapons or swords? And I'm hoping I have a picture of what you say. So,
I don't know if I can answer this. I'm very picky on African items. I have some that it's strange. I have some that I really, really like, and I have some that I don't like. We all grew up with the samurai sword and the Western swords. So we were brainwashed to love a certain, and so I think as I become more educated about African swords, then I'm like, this is the one, right? So I remember hearing about the throwing knives.
Okay. And
they were saying that you could throw it, and somebody said that you got this bright African sky, the sun is out, right? You throw it, it's up, it's thin, so it's whirling against the backdrop of the sky. It's hard to see. And then it's striking, but it's moving, so it can hit a shield, roll over, and hit the guy behind you. So I was like, it's just totally like,
that's what we were talking about. And
the function.
Yeah, one of these guys. Man.
Yeah. And like, you've got a really interesting thing. So you've got these, I don't even know if I can, you've got these curved blades, right? But there are some of these blades, I wish I had a better example, but with the Azande, they've got this kind of like, there's a kind of a bulge down here, right? But, Lamfio with Africa Writes, he's documented, I wish I had a good example, but he's documented an example where instead of something coming out of the blade down here, it's almost like it comes out, see how to angle this. It comes out more like up here. And it looks a lot like the throwing knives, but it's actually a whole sword, and this is in Sudan.
Okay.
And so you watch the movement of these shapes around the continent and where they go. You see these beautiful Mandinka sabers. So I really love Mali. So one of my favorites is Mandinka saber, which a lot of time they attribute they say as a European blade in there that they fixed and put into an African sheath.
Trade
we
blade.
Didn't know, right. We didn't know why the sheaths look like they did because they've got this big bulge at the end. But if you look at different Congolese swords and even Yoruba swords, you can see that shape is the shape of the actual sword blade. So, you know, you see these persistence of shapes around. And so I think I'm still just I'm learning so much about African swords and their function that all of them, every time I learn, I'm like, you know, it's exciting. You know what I mean?
And you mentioned the similar shapes found throughout Africa. I believe you mentioned I'm not sure if it was your paper or not, but you mentioned how a lot of the smiths had freedom to travel. So they say they would go here and there, because all you need to build a forge is some dirt, and there's dirt everywhere, So a lot of these smiths were able to travel, and they take those shapes around with them. One of the most interesting shapes, and of course I don't have it, the ebon from the Benin Empire. It's got I'm gonna call it a fish shape. It's kind of shaped like a fish, and and the most extravagant examples can be found with the Benin people. They're pierced. There's rings on them. They're dedicated. They're decorative. But that fish-shaped blade can be found well into the Congo. All around neighboring people who don't aren't Benin have that shape. Right. And I love to see that, like that shape, that continuity, same yet different, all across Africa.
And all across the Sahel, you see the sheaths of swords that are not that shape, but the sheath kind of replicates that same type of a fish shape that you're talking about, certainly on the end. All across the Sahel, from Mali to
the Kubas. The Kubas have that shape. Cascara, all the way across to the Sudan, like Cascaras, they have that same bat shape.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
The
blade shapes are really there. It's a lot to think about there for sure. It's a lot to think about. Yeah. I have this feeling that I have this feeling that the throwing blade, the throwing sticks that you see around the world, that you see in Africa, I feel like they evolve. I feel like they're related to these curved blades once you get into metal. I feel like they're familiar with this shape. People are using this shape. You see it. I mean, I think there's somebody had a picture of it in Darfur. You see it in obviously Egypt, and then you see these curved blades all over the place too. And I suspect that, because I don't think it takes a lot. I think that I know with the Aborigines in Australia, I think they have some that they're not just throwing; they wind up fighting with those. So I think it doesn't take a lot to, once you realize you can hit somebody with this and what that shape does. I don't think it takes a lot to wind you up at a curved sickle blade.
Yeah,
mass density and an edge.
Yeah. So Clarence, you mentioned some blades you don't like. I'll go first, and then you'll tell us. So and it's really not something that I don't like. It's not the blade that I don't like. And I'm gonna. It actually started. It's a phenomenon that started with Forged in Fire. So when they did the Ida as one of their final weapons, they produced more of a seme. Like what they produced looked more like a Maasai seme to me.
I love that. That's a beautiful blade shape.
Yes. So the Ida is more of a more the Ida more has that fish kind of bat shape to it more than the leaner seme. And I just noticed that on the internet after that episode, if you type Ida, you get pictures of semes. And it's definite semes because they include the sheath. And there is no mistaking a Maasai seme in its sheath. There's no mistaking that thing. And so that's kind of, you kind of get upset that like, oh, that's not a sim. You're misrepresenting an Ida, but it's like a week ago nobody even heard of an Ida. So it's like okay, we're getting some play for the Ida, but now let's well, that's not really an Ida. Let me show you what a real one is. But that's just one of my one of the things that I don't like. So why don't you tell us what weapon don't you like?
Rather than just going specific, I think here's the thing. I feel like as Americans, we are really just scratching the surface of reconnecting with African warriors, martial arts, and these traditions. And I think Blades Without Context, you either just like the shape or you don't. And if all your historical context has been how Europeans fight or how Asian people fight, you don't really understand what you're looking at until you do it. Until you realize the sickle sword is a reach around these giant, light, large.
I swear you were watching the broadcast before you came on. Because
go ahead. Yeah, until you realize that this thing, you got this blade that you can like reach behind, tap. You gotta. I mean, they had to be with their spears, and they're like, God, this is terrible. You're fighting. You can't get around this fool. He's got a giant, long Central African shield. African people we know how to move. Yeah. You can't get him. It's like, this is terrible. I want to go home. How many battles ended by, you know what? We're going home.
A whole lot. That was
until somebody showed up
before Shaka
and was like,
changed it. One guy gets hit. That's it. Battle's over. All right, you guys won. We're going to go home. All right, that's it.
For sure. So then somebody showed up on the field. They had a sword and they reached behind your shield and cut something off. And everybody was like, oh my God. And just like that, the sickle sword has to have moved everywhere, because every time somebody saw that, they're like, oh no.
Yeah.
No. So I think it's just the, and then, people butcher stuff. I mean, stuff is currency, stuff is a trade blade, stuff is, you don't know what stuff is, you see stuff and you're like, well, how is this even an effective tool? You don't know what you're looking at a lot of the time. So I think as I learn, what's going on, that really makes it exciting in the culture. Like, again, Lantia with Africa Writes, this guy goes over. We're talking about how we see this guy as like, I see him as like a modern black superhero. And he's like a real life superhero. You said he's like the Black Indiana Jones.
Yes.
Right. So this guy he's doing his research in Africa, doing what he does, and he comes across a famous xylophone that was played. It's tied to the historic xylophone played by Sumananguru Kante in the Sunjata epic, And he comes across, I think that he comes across other things, but anyway, there's a sword that's tied to this whole thing, and it's a magical sword, and he starts describing it, and it's like, I don't know how much, I don't want to say everything because I don't know how much he just said this to me or what I read, I don't remember, but when he describes the sword, it's like, it goes from, okay, here's an interesting sword to like, oh, because that's, what is Excalibur if it's not from the lady in the lake?
Right.
If it's not wielded by the once and future king. So when you have a sword that's born from the spirit of the this and the spirit of the that, and if you hold it, it gives you the power to unite the most powerful empires, and you know what I'm saying? Then it has that story. Then everybody loves it. Then it's fly. Like, I don't care. What I'm saying? Well, that's the thing. That's the So we get those backstories, man. I think it's that changes the whole dynamic. Then it doesn't matter. I'm trying to deal with that curved shape. I'm trying to rock with that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Oh
yeah.
So I took some pictures Joseph. Some of these are some pictures here. Where are these pictures from?
So these pictures were actually taken. I took these in the Scottish National Museum, and this is actually part of the entrance exhibit. You walk in. It's a set of stairs that takes you up to the main body of the exhibit itself, of the museum itself. And this was one of the very first things you see on display. Is these collections of various blades and swords. And it was very striking because a number of these different swords are swords that I had only seen in museum catalogs or had only seen in various historical texts prior. So, I was going there just to see the museum. I was on vacation. I wanted to go to the museum, see what was there. And lo and behold, as soon as I step in, there are blades that I've been studying.
Wow.
In fact, the exact blade in the bottom right corner, the Athena that you had in that photograph right there, was one. I spent like a minute and a half staring at it because that exact blade I had studied in a textbook prior. And it's like, I'm looking at the actual thing now.
Yeah, man.
That is a great feeling. I actually, the Met earlier this year had the Dogon sculptures, and I have been looking at this Dogon horseman for the past 15 years. Yeah. And, oh my God, there's a new picture of him. I've never seen this picture. I've had this picture for the past 5 years. Here's a new picture, and I see a little bit more of his leg. Oh my God. And he was right there. And I walked around him, and it felt like somebody, it kind of felt like somebody I had like dated that lived across, like they lived in California, and I've been dating this person, we've been following each other for maybe the past 6 years, long distance relationship, and like finally we met in Mississippi. So, in the Mississippi River. And it was such an amazing, like, oh my God, this thing is real. I can see the back of it. I can look underneath of it. Like, so I know that feeling, man. It's amazing to see something that you formed a relationship with, in person. So these are some great pictures. These are some beautiful.
Thank you.
Some nice pictures here. I COVID. So I started working with. I started training to become a tour guide for a docent for University of Pennsylvania Museum, and so I haven't been able to finish my final thing, and so I can start doing my tours. But so I've been doing that for the past year, and I used to go to that museum when I was in grade school. We used to go every year. High school, we would go. When I was in college and I was in art school, I would actually come home on the weekends, walk around, do some stuff. And then after I graduated and I became, and I joined the SEA and I started developing my Benin armor, I would go back to look at, the bronzes that they have. And so now to be kind of on the inside and to see, these works of art is definitely, quick story. They're putting the things in the cases, and so we're learning about it. We're training, and they have a nice big Benin bronze section with these different bells and all kind of bronzes. And as the lady was picking up the bronze to the bell to put it in, she had some scissors in her hand, and I don't know if I'm gonna get her in trouble. I hope I don't get her in trouble, but she hit the scissor to the bell, and it rang. And I'm like, that bell probably has not rung in 300 years. Like that bell felt so good to ring. I know that bell felt good. Like I'm ringing again. Like and then when they put it away, it was like, oh man, like that bell wants to ring. Like let him out. But it was I felt privileged that tiny little that I was there to witness that tiny mistake, because that bell just took a breath, and I was able to hear it and be a part of its natural purpose. Who knows, like the Oba could have heard that bell 500 years ago, 400 years ago. And now I'm hearing the bell that the king heard. So that was definitely that was exciting for me. Exciting little story. So
Yeah, I think from the African kind of perspective, I think like it's funny, going over. I've been over to Africa twice. I got to go to Mali, passed through Senegal, and I went to Nigeria. And it's funny because African people in the places I've been, they don't have these same kind of like the way that I don't know how to like if you want to study a hunter, you're becoming a hunter. Like no. I'm just learning about the traditional hunters. You'll be a hunter. Like, it's not a theory, it's not a theoretical halfway type of thing for them. So, one of the things that I think is and I think that is a good idea, particularly for people of African descent, but really for anybody with a passion and a value for it. These traditions still have life. There are still people that still have these skill sets, and they're still involved in some of the cultural aspects that we don't get to see, and so going over there and interacting with these people and talking to them and seeing how things are used and how things are forged, like it's crazy. I mean, I didn't get to see I was with Tuaregs and they were making tourist swords. So I got to see a lot of their decorative, work and everything. But man, like when I went to Nigeria, I had friends living there and they were there for like 2 years. So they're like, come to Nigeria. I was like, I don't want to come to Nigeria. I want to go back to Mali. That's my spot. And they were like, oh, come to Nigeria. So we went. And I said, well, maybe I can learn how to make the Dane gun, right? So you have these hunting societies that are hunters, but in times of war, they become part of the army or military societies. Traditionally, they're not the modern state, but they interface with the modern state sometimes. But they're part of the traditional states, and they still exist. And so I wanted to learn to make the Dane gun, and I got to do that. And it was crazy to work with people who are forging this tool that then is used in this practical way, but then also it's spiritually tied in, and so I think it's a little bit harder because I was talking to Yoruba people about swords, and they were like, "Yeah, you may as well talk to some like African American in New York, like, so where y'all swords at?" And they're like, "Swords? What are you talking about?" But different ethnicities, depending on where they are, they still hold on to older traditions. So they were saying the Fulani still deal with swords.
Okay.
And so going and connecting with the people that are still making this stuff, I think has tremendous value. And you can do it. It takes a little bit, but you can do it. Yeah. And it's so enriching, It's so enriching. The stories they have are not what you hear, So.
I can imagine. There was not too long ago, we talked yesterday, there was a story about a Sudanese sword maker, modern, and he's like, I all of my business now was just for weddings, but he's making these beautiful swords, and it's like this, he's sharpening this, he's putting it, as if you're going to use it, like this is not just a wall hanger to this man. He made a functional, beautiful weapon, and the person that they interviewed was like, well, I'm here because my sister's getting married and I don't have a sword. I need a sword for the wedding, because it's important to the culture. But it's like, he's going to dance with that. He's going to do the the Beja dance one time with that at the wedding. But I'm like, man, if I could contact this guy, I know 15 people who would buy. Well, Lafia's got to take me over there so I can meet him. So.
I made my connection to Mali. We didn't have anybody in Mali. All of our people are are connected through Nigeria. So I had like a friend who had a friend who didn't want to talk to me. That was it. I made connections through YouTube. and guys who I saw videos of people forging stuff in Mali and contacted the guy who had made the video, and he just happened to be a really great guy. He's a Peace Corps guy, and we talked over a period of time, and he, you know, I wound up meeting up with these guys, and they're really wonderful people that I just, you know, really, you know, love, and great guys to this day. These people, you know, there was a guy who had written, there was an article in the BBC where a guy had written about, somebody had written about the hunters, and two people had been quoted. One I tracked down, he had passed away. Another I tracked down, he was a professor. So professors are public people. Oh. I spoke with this professor and we talked back and forth. I wound up staying with his family when I went to Mali.
Wow. So
the connections are there. They're so possible. And it's just, you know, we just tend to think, I mean, you don't because of your situation, you know, obviously, but a lot of times we think about Africa as another planet. And it's like, it would take me longer to ride a train to get to Seattle, where I'm from, than to ride a plane to Africa.
Wow.
And you know, Sudanese sword makers, you know, I mean, it's not easy. We, everybody don't have that much money laying around, but if you make it a project and you know, it's like these things. I mean, I have a friend on the other side. I have a friend who did like she did like a rites of passage. This sister got to do a rites of passage in like the Gambia.
Wow.
She had an elder, and they took him over there, and her elder did some video of these people doing this stuff, and they've got their swords, and they're out there with their swords, and they're doing the blade proof, you know, cutting it, and then he pulls out like an apple or something with the same sword and slices it right in half. Now, you know, part of the thing that people do in Africa is showmanship. So there is stuff that is more like tricks, but if that was a trick, that was a really good one because it was really quick. You know, it's like, it wasn't like the setup where it's like it was like they're cutting, boom. You know what I mean? And I was like, and her guy has a connection to these people.
Wow.
They're not on Mars. They're just in Africa.
Just over there.
You know, it's just a matter of wanting to go. And you know, it's hard. I mean, but even if would it take you 5 years to organize a trip if that was the intention?
Probably not. I mean, might be short.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. We just don't think about Africa as somewhere we just go a lot.
Yeah.
Like I said, I mean, you might be different because y'all might just be over there for whatever reason.
Yeah.
You feel me?
Yeah.
But
I have friends who, I mean, my buddy Ira goes, I mean, he's there twice a year, you know, like.
Right, because again, we all have the same deal. Yeah. We married the African women, so we go and see family.
Yeah, and his story was the same thing. It was like, you know, he knew one guy, so he went over there, and that guy was like, "Yo, you got to go meet this guy." And then it's like, "Oh man, okay." Right. You know, he's like, he goes to Ivory Coast, and then it's like, "Yo, how'd you wind up in Mali? Like, what are you doing? Like, you went to Ivory Coast? Like, I knew a guy." And then
because they're connected. That's the thing. I'm with blacksmiths in Mali, and I'm talking to them, and they're talking about Jine, right, the spirits. And they're like, well, one of my guys is telling me the queen of the Jine is Mami Wata. And I'm like, in a Muslim French country, the queen of the Jine is Mami Wata. How does that work? So who passed you that knowledge base? Where does that come from? Does that come from Mali? So what's happening is with the Brotherhood of the Hunters and just the movement, the northern Cote d'Ivoire is full of Burkinabe, Malinke, I think, and Manika, however you say it, and people from Guinea. It's full of all these kind of Mande-related groups. They're all in the north. Right. So these people, you know, they move around. They've got families. They're connected. You know, so yeah, Africa's just interconnected, and absolutely go there. I'm interested in this. I go, okay, I know a guy. You know, boom. Well, I know a guy. You know, and then it's just it's exactly like that. It hops countries. The network is crazy. You can certainly pursue swords, and you know what it is. You go there, and then and you say, well, I want to know about the swords, but tell me about the spiritual stuff. And now you got a guy that's he's doing some Muslim writing and making magical Muslim making Muslim magic for swords in Sudan.
Wow. Man. Well, I think after maybe, you know what, that's gonna be my project to reach out to this guy and link up with him. I want to thank both of you for being with me here. We got some comments here. Stuart says I love the stream. So Don Cooks was with us. He showed up. Cinnamon, let's go. Cinnamon, I'm not sure Cinnamon, but I had a blast. Fellas, I hope you had a good time. I hope the fans learned some stuff from you all, and hopefully we can collaborate and do some stuff in the future, some future Hama stuff. Absolutely. I would appreciate it. So
I'll be on time next time. I apologize again, man. I thought I was doing good. I had the 3-year-old. We were literally forging jewelry together in the living room on an anvil. That's okay, man. That's all right. I said you were a special guest. So you made your entrance. So all right, fellas. Right. I appreciate you guys, and don't be strangers. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah, I'm definitely down to come back for sure.
All right, take it easy.
Same.
All right now.
So I want to thank those gentlemen for joining me today. I had a blast. This one went for almost an hour and a half here. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Hope you learned something, and thank you.